Back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. We're going through the looking glass today, and we're talking about technologies of a kind that may exist in government laboratories. It may well soon exist as we see Moore's law take off and advanced technologies coming more and more onto our landscape. I think it's of interest to discuss these things. And to make a note of these things, I considered this to be to go hand in hand with notions like AI safety and planning for other techno-futurist outcomes. I'm here with Kristen Conklin. She's an electrical engineer. She has more than a decade of experience working with Tennessee Valley Authority and Bechtel, and she's going to give us a little bit of ideas and backgrounds about prospects, present day, near-term and future prospects with neuroweapons. Tell us a little bit, Kristen Conklin, what are neuroweapons?
Well, neuroweapons would be a device or a chemical that's capable of taking the flow of forces in the nervous system and modifying them according to the design of that device or chemical. And, it's published in the declassified section of the CIA library that some of these devices have limitless range globally, and others are devices that can be used a few feet away from a person, or they're just chemicals that are aerosols that can be inhaled or consumed with food. My goal is to really represent the government the way they've chosen to be represented in the communications that we have today. So, don't aim to make up any of this, but to cite sources. Them as my source.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we can allow for some speculation. We know that the United States government has very heavily funded all manner of programs through DARPA. And others. The Pentagon has put money into creating human-enhanced soldiers, and many of the technologies that we see coming to the marketplace today, brain-computer interfaces of different kinds, all manner of augmented reality technologies. These things came out of DARPA incubators. And these things have been developed for many years. This kind of Manchurian candidate type technology, stories of this kind go back to the 1950s. And what do you say to people who are who respond to this kind of thing by saying that this is folks telling tales out of school? That if such things existed, we would be able to see demonstrated prototypes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
There's a gentleman I'm associates with who helped with the Bourne Identity, which was a series of movies about a target who had his memory erased by various means. And he guided the development of this movie and made sure it aligned with technology. His name is Jonathan Moreno. And you can actually see coming out of his mind what is available through this movie. It's more of a modern day, and sure enough, he's a professor at Penn State and close associates with Obama's chair of bioethics, I believe. And they do a lot at that school. To promote ethics and world peace, and also dealt with the more recent assaults that have made the media about the U.S. diplomats and in Cuba and in China, and there was Canadian diplomats as well. But also, you can have this like illustration, through a movie that he put together and read his papers, and his associate's papers published in the National Institute of Health, and find, I guess, more of a technical gift from them about how these agents work. And if it doesn't work for people on that level, I can just go down the list, and typically it's really pretty difficult because some of the terms are so industry specific. You can use electrical engineering terms to talk about neuromodulation, neuroscience. You can use intelligence terms. So it's, I really find that I have a pretty high success rate in having a meaningful conversation with many. And, I get a lot of encouragement. I'm really happy. It's just, it takes more time and more effort on my part to be able to find words that we, commonly use between me and whoever I'm speaking with about the situation.
You mentioned that you were interviewed by James Giordano. Yes, James Giordano. I'm looking at an article of his right now. And,
May I interrupt? Hold on, sorry, before you get too far. I actually interviewed him. He's an associate of mine. I hope to have the interview up soon. It's for the cybersecurity community. It's on the topic.
Very nice. Very nice.
Thanks.
Well, this interview is from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. Yeah, I will look forward to seeing that.
Okay.
And this is from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it's a little bit about neuroweapons and surveillance concerns, and it seems to make a pretty credible case for some of these technologies as becoming things that could be used and might be used particularly by state actors in limited ways. We all know, of course, there was what has been described as a neuroweapons attack on diplomats in Cuba last year.
Yes.
For those who don't recall that news item, tell us a little bit about what happened there and what is your interpretation of that as a neuroweapon related event.
Okay. Well, I can quote Giordano and from personal conversations. He is an expert in devices that don't have a global range, and during the interview, if you choose to watch it, he talks about devices that are short range that and talks about how they can be aimed at a person. But yeah, he was hired, or he was consulted by the government to give the probability that an assault happened by a weapon, and it wasn't a made-up illness. And the thing with probability is, if you have a background in stochastics and discrete math and various math courses, they will give you the event that an assault is likely to happen. It's just a mathematical formality. So when you see them in the news, typically saying, the doctors say an assault likely occurred, they're doing it on a set of probabilities. And it's just a mathematical term and they, for some reason, I don't know why they don't give the percent probability, but likely doesn't, when they say the assault likely occurred, it's not that they're inviting another interpretation that isn't data driven, and is suggesting that they need help. So they believe an assault occurred. What's really helpful is the doctors that interviewed them prior to media exposure have got together, and through SoftWorks, it's SOFWERX, the SoftWorks site did a presentation on neuroweapons and their exact findings of what happened to the diplomats. It's about 2 hours. There's a futurist also involved, talking about safety and the capacity that these assaults have to cripple a nation, to give everyone just a picture of what these devices are capable of. But if you really want to know exactly firsthand, I would suggest going to the SoftWorks website. Giordano is one of the speakers. Dr. Kerry Balaban, he's from Pennsylvania, I believe, University. Dr. Michael Hoffer is from Miami University, and Dr. James Canton, the Futurist. So.
And these are all gentlemen who've been referenced in the media quite a bit. As giving us some background on what might have happened here in this Cuba event. And so, 26 people were harmed. in this Cuba event. This was something that occurred at the embassy in Havana, and it was a series of incidents, and this seems to have been. I mean, it was something that was happening acoustically, right? It was this was something that affected their ears. That's true, right?
Yeah. Yes. I will say that they specify a certain quantity of diplomats. I think it was like I think you quoted the correct number, but there goes my cat. I didn't silence him like my phone. Um, uh, yeah, but they have reports of actually hundreds of people. Some media reports that hundreds of people were actually victims, and I don't exactly know why the diplomats were the only focus in the news. It's a real question that I have, and I actually have done a little bit of digging and found that neuroweapon assaults don't make the news. I don't know why. I just, it's kind of funny to me that it's only a focus on the diplomats. But during the presentation, it's the SoftWorks presentation at the end, the last speaker, Dr. James Canton, refers to other victims as well. So
yeah, so there's a couple of possible explanations for this event that were described by authorities, and what I mentioned, an ultrasonic exposure, an acoustic weapon, is considered a very probable use.
yeah, and electromagnetic.
There also, the electromagnetic pulse was considered a probable use, and also some kind of microwave energy element. It was said to have been less likely than those other two, but possible as a part of this. How are spies and nation-state actors apt to use this sort of thing? How could we be affected by this kind of weaponry? What's the downside for all of us in the existence of such things?
There are actually no deterrents set up in society that civilians have access to. There's intelligence systems that look at antenna networks globally, and they view the radiation coming off of them, and why civilians don't have access to data about the weaponization of the electromagnetic and acoustic spectrum based upon this equipment, these intelligence gathering resources. I don't know. There's absolutely no deterrence. It's a sore spot for a lot of people. Dr. Haffer, I do know after he is accepting patients right now. So if you think that there's a possibility that you want to have the same evaluation the diplomats have had, you can actually go to Miami. I guess provided your insurance covers it. Maybe you can pay out of pocket, but you can go to Miami and have the same type of evaluation the diplomats had. Is the only resource I know that's available to the public to really find out what's going on with their health if they suspect something is not right. But truly, the stage after that of actually making a report and saying, a doctor has confirmed that, I've suffered a neuroweapons assault. I really don't know what happens. There's no protection system. I've actually known a few people that have gone down there and haven't heard any good word from them about a change in their life or in their health afterwards. And it's kind of amazing. I called the doctors, after I learned about their specialties through SoftWorks, and they actually said they're looking for speaking opportunities, which is amazing to me that they haven't been presented with more to even answer my phone call in the first place. And also they're trying to set up a network doctors and protection systems, deterrence that civilians have access to. So I have Giordano is Dr. Giordano is involved with the Human Brain Project, Sub Project 12. I believe he's the task leader, and they are in the process of making a global effort and have published an opinion on responsible dual use and of science. And they have, they want law enforcement and it to trickle down through all aspects of society and to establish deterrence and raise awareness. And there's a lot of negatives right now as far as protection schemes are concerned. I haven't been able to find one, and I've really spent a great deal of time looking. Even at our power plants, buildings that are designed to carry nuclear fuel, and don't have protection schemes either. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. There could be some of these targets which would otherwise have all manner of security protocols in place that wouldn't be at all prepared for something of this kind.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hoffer, who you mentioned, also described something a little spooky. The victims of this event in Cuba, that is, these people described these pulses, the whatever it was, the electromagnetic pulse of this ultrasonic beam following them around their home or hotel where they were, in some sense, sort of targeting them, and they were only able to get away from that by leaving the premises. So that's again, we might, if someone is experiencing something else, some natural phenomena of, or whatever it is, there's possible explanations there where people become in extremis might tend to become unreliable narrators, but it's still quite a disturbing account. Now, it's interesting that also you mentioned Dr. Hoffer in the same breath as Human Brain Project, because this is the flip side of this coin. As we are making breakthroughs in neuroscience and computing, brain-computer interfaces, things of this kind, these things will add a great deal to our civilization, give us many interesting capacities, and broaden many markets. But there is this flip side that we're touching upon here, where this same greater understanding of the human mind allows for greater manipulation of different kinds. What do you think about brain-computer interfaces? I'm on the record as on this podcast and other interviews many times as saying that I'm interested in Neuralace. I would be among the first people who are, if it was made available to me, to be using this. But it's not a proven technology itself. It's supposed to be coming to human trials for otherly abled people in about 1 year. But we don't know what the actual experience of those people will be, if this is going to be all that it's cracked up to be. But what do you think about these other technologies? Are you hopeful that they do hold some promise for our society, or do you feel that they will be ill-used in the way that maybe these neuroweapons are ill-used?
I have to say I haven't heard Elon Musk mention ethics once. So with that being said, I would want to know, does your Neuralink device cooperate with a neuroweapons assault? Where do you pull statistics from to create these devices? Do you do it from, I'll just come out and say it. This is a delicate subject, but, do you take information from the DSM and contribute that to your device when there's been no history of success there? And right now there's 1 billion opportunities, I believe, on the earth to find one of the 300 disorders, and I think it's about 300 disorders exist. And given the capacity for harm with when there's no evidence coming out of certain aspects of the medical field, it's concerning. However, I can shed a tear over this one because I really, so much that we have access to. We have access to, with no ability to consent to, like, you weren't born giving permission to, someone permission to.
Nobody asked me if I wanted to be born.
Yeah, right.
I'm still angry about that.
No, I'm bitter. But I will say I was really had great hopes for Neuralink and whatever goes on there to free us of what we were like forced to have. And I'm a little bit upset over everything. I didn't get to choose my looks, my brains were, I'm an American and didn't get to choose a lot of it. And I'm really hoping the transhuman community and Neuralink can give us choices. Yeah.
Well, we want to stay at the abreast of these things at every point and be discussing them in an open and honest way. We shouldn't allow taboos in our community or more generally to keep us from addressing something that could prove to be very disruptive, if not something that would be akin to an existential risk to the human race. Anything that has those dimensions should be described and should be discussed in the broadest of forums. So, we mentioned earlier how some narratives of this kind date back to the mid 1950s, and the film The Manchurian Candidate came out, I believe, in 1962. In 1970, Brzezinski wrote a book titled "Between Two Ages: America's Role in the Technotronic Era," which to some this term technotronics describes some technologies, concerns about technologies of this kind. Why do you think we haven't seen, if this technology is potentially existed in government labs and so forth for these many decades? Why haven't we seen a prototype, a little more direct evidence of this? How are they managing to keep all of this?
Well, I might impress you with this. One of my most favorite finds in the CIA library is a reference to a project in Russia. I think it started in the early 1920s, about how they aimed to put people, torture them with sleep deprivation across the globe. It's the CIA library is rich with this stuff about these projects that started before, like, World War II. And it's really upsetting that we don't know more about it. I have to say, it's really taken me like 15 years as an engineer to really understand the capacity of these devices and what it actually means. But I've done a great deal of networking in the intelligence community. And I've just asked people the question, like, would you want to participate in a project where, to collapse the chasm of knowledge between the intelligence agencies and civilians about the devices that you use? And I've gotten a lot of people that say that they want to work with me. It's something that bothers them. And so I'm just at the point now, it's like, what platform? I have a couple opportunities, and there are people that want to reach out. And I guess we'll see how it goes. I really think that it's really hard for people to understand the capacity of evil. I know the transhuman community talks about, we can create a really destructive AI, and that comes from the brain of a human, which is really upsetting. And so when you start off with, this weapon, this device is torturing me and not letting me go to sleep, and I'm stuck on coffee and whatever else, cocaine, who knows what you try just to stay awake. And it is, sorry, this is what I was talking about. I can't remember what I said.
But we mentioned, we mentioned the Manchurian Candidate reference, but this was.
Oh yeah, why don't we know that these devices exist? Yeah, got it. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if people really believe the capacity of evil that's capable with these devices. It's almost like the story is so unbelievable that someone would be this mean and want to do this to people. I know prior to really investigating about these devices. I can only speak for myself. If someone told me about the capacity of evil, I would really not believe it. I think that's one point. The lack of education, it's really pretty bad. Neuralink wants to present us with these devices to enhance us, which is great. But, I don't see the education coming from them. Just like the cell phone industry gives us these devices about, with cell phones and computers and, wireless, the FCC, what they have a domain over. And, people really don't understand what non-thermal effects and control means. And we have these devices in our hands, and I see the news talking about it, and no one around me responds. And it's just, I don't understand why. I really don't know what goes on in the human brain to look at an issue and say, I want to have the right to know what I'm purchasing, what I'm buying, what I'm hearing. It's just, I really can't tell you. It's just, I think there's a great deal of factors of things. And I know from the close experience that I have with a few people talking about these devices, like there's absolutely no way there's evil that exists on this planet. America's the superpower. We had the greatest kinetic weapons set with the nuclear bomb, and sure enough, no one threatens us. And it's just this mindset of, it just can't happen here. And sure enough, it is. I don't know why. I would be open to any one who wants to collaborate as to, how to end this type of the gap of knowledge. It's just, any idea would be welcome, but from me and many, many, many others. So
Yes.
it's just, and also for the diplomats, doctors that we were speaking of earlier, for them to say they're looking for opportunities to educate. I don't understand how their schedule's not completely full. I'm just blown away by that. What do you think? How could that be?
Yes. Yeah, it is perplexing that we've allowed so much unconscionable things to be done on our behalf as U.S. citizens by our government. Just looking at these, just looking at all the MK Ultra related experiments that were done. These are all some form or other of psychotropically induced states, and there's other things that hypnosis involved, and that's a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
And we see some degree of low-grade social engineering occurring, relatively low-grade social engineering occurring today in the social media world, where we have a certain element of choice being removed by the generation of false narratives, fake news, by the promotion of certain ideas through organizations like Cambridge Analytica, a dozen others of similar scale and scope, doing this sort of thing. And then when you have nation states, intelligence organizations involving themselves in those operations, as happened in the last 3 elections, to some degree, most famously in 2016. And you have also the larger part of that story, to my way of thinking, which is corporate powers manipulating those systems. When we start to see more head-up devices, more augmented reality, more brain-computer interfaces, more use of more robust digital assistance, NLP. We're going to see more possibilities for manipulation here, and it is deeply concerning that we have a culture that has a pretty low level of literacy on these subjects. I think the only thing that we can really do is ask that people do consider these things, and don't just dismiss them out of hand. Some of them might not be 100% proven today, but they all remain things that could be realistic prospects as more and more technologies come out. So we have to stay on top of it. That's the only thing that I can that I can really
Yeah.
suggest. I mean, everyone in this race, and almost everyone basically everyone in this our specific transhumanist party primary election that we're talking about is running on a platform of reducing Pentagon spending, reducing government bloat, getting rid of this kind of thing, and that's largely to do with restoring prosperity in the United States, not spending so much money on just the military-industrial complex, so wasting it. But it would also tend to remove some of these sorts of things from the equation. It's in commenting on the 2016 election, people have noted that the United States had underfunded their cyber war efforts. They were focusing on other kinds of spy stuff and other kinds of military stuff, and not focusing on cyber wars. And Russia was able to, and other nations, but most particularly Russia in this story, was able to get more value out of those cyber war expenditures, and exert more influence in these kind of back channel kinds of ways. And so I mean, it's very difficult to say what we should be doing, in terms of the bare minimum for cyber wars and similar things. But we certainly shouldn't be creating weapons that could do great damage to civilians, and creating these very kind of underhanded WMDs and so forth. And it's a horror that, to the extent that such things exist, it's not a credit to the human race.
Yeah.
Well, any final thoughts or message that you would like to get to us? I'm running a little low on battery.
Just one last minute.
Yes.
I did say at the beginning that these devices basically aim to correct the flow of forces in the nervous system, but they can also correct for dual use, good or bad, all the way from the cellular level up into the individual's entire system. So maybe I was just a little too narrow and I wanted to correct myself, but thank you so much for asking, and thanks so much. You've been wonderful, and I've really enjoyed, watching you and your campaign and the whole transhumanist movement.
Well, thank you, and all of these concerns are fall within the window of tech and policy, and that is the mandate of this organization, is to describe tech and policy concerns. So we have to be talking about these things, and there are very real concerns. There's some kind of sonic weapon has been used in this Cuba incident. Some kind of weapons of this kind do seem to be used. We've seen some actual prototypes for weapons of this kind sound weapons and things. What do you think about So we mentioned that some of these weapons, they might be used to temporarily incapacitate people. They might not even realize what's happened to a high degree, the reason why they were incapacitated. They just felt poorly or something. So this is the kind of thing that could conceivably be used for riot control,
Right.
or all manner of things like this in warfare. Do you think that in some sense this is a more humane approach than traditional weaponry? Do you think that what does some of this look like in practice?
It seems like the humane thing to say is, we don't have lethal weapons, but or we don't use lethal weapons. But that leaves, in this case, there's no smoking gun, so the ammunition is invisible. The devices can defeat line of sight principles, and it really gives a leverage to whoever's behind the weapon of just infinite strength. At this point, I don't even know why we use kinetic weapons. I've done a little bit of research in the CIA library as to learn why. And the kinetic and the non-kinetic, more gets accomplished psychologically to still use the kinetic spectrum, according to one of the publications I've read, which helped. Honestly, I've really lost a great deal of sleep wondering why these the the good and the bad about the non-kinetic and the non-lethal. So it's just, yeah, I guess the lack of a smoking gun and being able to hold the person responsible who's actually using the weapon is a scary thing.
Well, I'll be looking forward to our continuing this discussion with yourself and your associates. We're planning to do a neuroweapons and related technology discussion on the Steel Archer show, Detonation, where we talk about a lot of tech policy stuff. And so I'll be looking forward to that. And it was really nice sitting down and talking with you, Kristen.
Oh, you're made of sugar. Thank you, so.
Yes.